They have just received sad and tragic diagnosis, and this is very devastating. Who wouldn't need care and counseling at that time? But this law would make sharing of information on perinatal hospice services mandatory. It would make it a possible felony for a doctor who ignores this law 3 times and would threaten a doctor with civil lawsuits, punitive damages, and possible loss of his medical license. That is just too heavy-handed as possibly applied before. Most fetal problems are not discovered until after 20 weeks. Now, proponents believe in the sanctity of life, that the embryo has a soul from the moment of conception, and they believe in the concept of fetal pain. So now this soul has a fatal flaw, possibly a painful one, and beyond a certain gestation age, it could be certainly causing distress to the fetus. So they propose to encourage parents to make this soul suffer a long, tragic pregnancy, probably dying during the pregnancy, or possibly being delivered only to die immediately or soon afterwards. That's the lethal part of fetal anomaly. Not to mention submitting the parents to the torture and misery of knowing there's nothing to do and the mother is just an incubator. Because they'd encourage the woman to not terminate. Why? How is this saving a life? If God has blessed this fetus with a life and a soul, why do you think that God would want it to suffer more or longer than needed and not call it into his arms? How is this better than grief counseling alone? This perinatal counseling may be nice, but I think it can be turned into a guilt trip to persuade parents to stick it out and convince them that they should be feeling guilty for even wanting to terminate an ill-fated pregnancy. Just like crisis pregnancy centers provide some false and misleading information to change a woman's mind about abortion, how can we trust that the mandatory information or counseling provided would not also be used to guilt or quietly bully parents into making the right decision at a vulnerable time? The whole purpose of the real authors of this bill is to prevent abortion, no matter who it hurts. And once again, they are using doctors as the means to enforce their beliefs under penalty of law. This should be a decision between the doctors, the parents, and the doctors, and no doctor should face stiff penalties for not exposing vulnerable parents to potential psychological intimidation that could occur. Thank you.
Yeah, Mary Rick.
Ted Harris.
The one interesting part of this bill is that it says may not receive an abortion based on lethal, fatal anomaly, so on and so forth. When you say lethal, that means deadly. That means it cannot live. I don't know. I'm real confused about this bill and the wording in this bill, which seems to contradict what is in this Fetal Heartbeat Act. So again, I'll have to agree that it just seems to be putting the parents on a guilt trip. Now I work now in a hospice. I've never heard of a perinatal hospice. I've also worked in a clinic for children who had serious anomalies at birth. And no one has addressed the pain that these children go through throughout their lives, being deaf, blind, unable to move. So I think we have to consider that at that point, is that when they go to the hospice? It's really confusing to me that both of these bills are very confusing. And if this has civil penalties, that's another concern. And it seems to be another bill that's just trying to run the doctors out of business, out of the state, which is, not really very pleasant. Thank you.
And thank you, Mary Rick.
Rosalind Hedronik. Rosalind. That's the last on this bill.
Rosalind McDermott. I'm from Huntsville, Alabama. I'm representing myself and a lot of other people on social media who are concerned with this. I'd like to point out that all 4 of these bills are attempts to restrict women's constitutional rights to abortion, and as such, they will meet legal challenge, just as last year's legislation did. And it should be incumbent upon the authors of these bills that are so certain to be embattled in court to account for the cost of that battle, and I see no accounting here. No estimate how much that's going to cost or anything. A state that is so broke it can't afford to accept billions offered to improve the health care of its citizens surely can't afford any of these bills. But HB493 is just cruel and insensitive. Should a woman be forced to carry a brain-dead fetus to term and birth a stillborn? This is nothing but vindictive, seeming to blame the woman for fetal abnormalities. Question I have is, since women would have to sign a form saying they opted for abortion after being told about perinatal hospice services, is this creating a public record? Does it violate privacy laws relating to health care? And before you say, I don't know, as y'all are consistently want to say in this body on the bills restricting abortions, I heard it dozens of times last year. Let me tell you that if you haven't explored the ramifications that means a development or consequence growing out of and sometimes complicating a problem, a plan, a statement, or a law, then you have no business voting for that law or even proposing it. It's your job to find out what will happen as a result of a bill that you propose. And in fact, that information should be in the text of the law. And when the people get the right to introduce legislation themselves, I'm going to introduce a law that legislation must address consequences of its application. Thank you.
And thank you, Mary Ruth.
I don't do that.